Ridiculous. Ridiculous. God, you're ridiculous.
Doing nothing, bragging every day around you. People know you frontin'. You telling me you got it, you must be doing nothing. Bragging every day around you. People know you frontin'. You telling me you got it, you must be think you got it. You got it, you must be think you got it. You got it, you must be think you got it. You got it, you must be think you got it. You got it, you must be.
To be or not to be. It reminds me of a story.
Ridiculous. Ridiculous.
Well, I don't think there's a more essential issue than the issue of climate change.
The future of the auto industry is electric. There's no turning back.
This is a preview of things to come.
More Americans could soon get the chance to drive a vehicle made in China.
The new vehicles that we're making at Ford are data collection machines. They're like mobile drones.
We're going to be noisy, we're going to be disruptive, we're going to be unignorable, we're going to be a pain in the ass until you listen to us.
The first factor is easily discerned by anybody who has their eyes open, that compromises and erodes the hopeless existential view of the world that we're getting from science, is the idea that nature is in fact, across all scales and all levels of phenomena, a unity. It's not a coincidence that electrons spinning around an atomic nucleus and planets going around a star and star clusters orbiting around the gravitational center of a galaxy. It's no coincidence that these systems exhibit the same kind of order on different scales. And yet science would say that is a coincidence. You know, P.W. Bridgman, who was a philosopher of science, defined a coincidence as what you have left over when you apply a bad theory.
Truth is not a given.
Vaccine, GMOs,
Jeffrey Epstein,
UFOs.
Splashed. Mark bearing a range.
There are those who want the truth suppressed, sequestered, and exploited. Then there are those who want the truth revealed, disseminated, and uncensored. You are one of those people.
Chester Bennington. He was 41 years old and the artist was found dead.
I see the need for action. I see the need for a great reset.
The very word secrecy is repugnant in a free and open society.
Hundreds of abusive clergy.
It was unidentified, and that's why it was so unsettling.
You deserve the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
What's up, everybody? Welcome to Dauntless Live. I'm so excited to have you here with me today. Today is July 3rd, 2026. We are multicasting on YouTube, X, Rumble, BitChute, on our website too. So happy you're here with us today. I'm honored to spend this time with you. We're going to be talking about all things sunshine. We're going to keep it light, but we're also going to go super deep into the evidence, into the nuance. If you're one of those people who craves deeper investigations and you appreciate the nuance, smash that like button, and we're happy to have you here. This is going to be more interesting than I think you might assume just by the title. Sometimes my titles are very bland and to the point, but I try to keep them straightforward so you know what you're going to get. But then I try to over deliver. We've done a lot of research to, cram into this investigation. And if you're like me, you grew up hearing these two opposing dichotomies about sunshine, sun exposure, and sunscreen, and the risks for both. And you're just like, I don't know what to believe. There's really good arguments on both sides, and I want some clarity on the subject. Well, you're in the right place, because we go past the tribalism, we transcend the duality, we try to, give credit where it's due on both sides, but the devil is definitely in the details. So buckle up. But before you do that, head over to dauntlessdialogue.com. We are a media studio. We produce original docuseries, documentaries, animated series, short form content, long form content. We spend hundreds of hours researching, writing, and editing our content. And we produce at a slower rate than others, admittedly, but what we put out, I think, is timeless and powerful. We try to be emotionally and intellectually compelling with our documentaries. We have a new one out in the past week or two, Cognitive Warfare. That's the first episode of Simon Esler's new series, You Are Here. And he has the second episode close to completion, which is even better than the first, I might say. If you want to support us, the best way to do so is click that purple and blue subscribe button on the top right corner. You'll be brought to our subscription plans. You can purchase a 1-month streaming plan for $9 a month. You can go with the value plan and save some coins there. And then we even have a gold pass, and this is a one-time purchase, for our truest, most loyalist supporters. And we appreciate everybody who has purchased a gold pass. By the way, we're going to be doing monthly live streams, not live streams, monthly video chats with our Gold Pass members. So if you want to get a chance to hang out with me, if you want to get a chance to hang out with the rest of the Dauntless crew, this is your ticket. This is your Gold Pass. Just like with, the Wonka factory. This will get you into the factory, and you get to see how the everlasting gobstoppers are made here at Dauntless. We're a different type of streaming service. We are half the price of the major streamers, but I think we're so much more valuable in terms of the content that you're going to get. You're going to get something that's unique and edgy, for sure. As far as, as George Orwell said, telling the truth is a revolutionary act. In times of universal deceit, telling the truth is a revolutionary act, I think is the full quote. And so we could certainly use your subscriptions. We have several films in the works right now. We have four films in the works right now. And Adrian from Rise Tire is working on the 6th installment of our Order Out of Chaos series on 9/11, investigating the true culprits and the lesser known rabbit holes surrounding that. We're going to have a trailer for you very soon, and you can imagine with Adrian, he's going to up the ante and raise the bar. So we're excited for that. We've got Loyal 9, who he's been very busy with his startup company, and that has taken him away from focusing on the film as much as he'd like to, but it's inching forward, and hopefully that'll be out very soon. That's shifting into Power Volume 2. That's his exploration of the automotive market, particularly with China's influence. And we also have, as I mentioned, Simon Esler working on the second and third installments for You Are Here. He's working on both of them simultaneously so that they're going to come out in quick succession. They're related conceptually, and so he's just killing two birds with one stone to get both of those episodes out. And Jason Burmis has been working on the Epstein files, and as I said, I think in a previous show, it's a challenge when you're running a company like this, working with independent creators, because I don't breathe down their necks and I don't control them. I don't pull their puppet strings. These are people who are, in many cases, juggling a lot of balls in the air. And Jason, I don't know where it's at with him. I've been trying to get him to complete it, and we were supposed to have it done a while ago, and actually 2 to 3 months ago. So it is what it is, and I hear you guys. I appreciate your patience. I'm doing everything I can on my end, but certain things are just out of my control. And so I'm also writing a film that I will be editing, and so there's a lot going on behind the scenes. Thank you all for your support and your patience. And without further ado, let's get into today's subject matter. Today, we're going to talk about sun exposure versus sunscreen. And please feel free to drop any questions that you may have in the chat, and we'll get to them towards the end of the show. There is this dichotomy that basically says you have to worship the sun and bake in it, or you have to avoid it totally. It's sort of reckless in either direction. And what we're going to do is we're going to try to establish an evidentiary baseline that outlines the trade-offs and also addresses the misconceptions regarding this, I think, thorny subject. For some reason, it seems to polarize a lot of people. I go to conferences or I chat with people in the truth community, and man, the opinions are very strong when it comes to this. I want to say right from the outset that you guys know that I'm like Mr. Natural. I mean, I advocate getting your nutrition from food first and foremost. I mean, I am all about exercise and stretching and strength training and hormesis and everything. I haven't taken pharmaceutical drugs in, I don't even know, like over 20 years. So with that said, I'm not here to promote sunscreens. That's not my intention. That's not my goal. My goal is simply to outline the pros and cons for both. And I just ask that you keep an open mind as we explore this. You don't need to hide from the sun like a vampire, nor do you need to, I'm thinking of that episode of Seinfeld where Kramer lathers butter on his skin and then cooks himself like a turkey. We're not advocating for either of those, but we will address the reality that ultraviolet radiation is a group 1 carcinogen. And what that means essentially is that, according to the IARC, the International Agency for Research on Cancer, you have groups based on the confidence interval of evidence. And so we can say with great certainty that plutonium is carcinogenic. We can also say that ultraviolet radiation from the sun, UVA, UVB, is also a group 1 carcinogen. That doesn't mean it's the most carcinogenic risk factor in your environment, in your world, in your life, but it does mean that it's quite certain. And so we're going to get into the sunscreen paradox. This is really the crux of the debate. So we're going to start from the outset addressing the sunscreen paradox. The sunscreen paradox, just in short, is, it seems that epidemiologically those who slather the most sunscreen have the highest rates of skin cancers. And so we're going to talk about why that is. There's a number of good reasons, but there's one really tremendous reason why that is. And this has to do with the classic J-curve artifact that is taught, day one, semester one of epidemiology. And so if you're not familiar with the J-curve, we're going to explain that. If you're not familiar with the J-curve, you shouldn't be posting these things on social media. You shouldn't be parroting these things sort of blindly and deafly, regurgitating misinformation that's, it spreads faster than wildfire. Yeah, we're going to address how rising melanoma rates prove that sunscreen fails. But this is, of course, the result of confounding. We're going to talk about who is most at risk of skin cancer. We're going to talk about common misconceptions, such as the idea that sunscreen directly causes skin cancer or is entirely ineffective. We're going to talk about how there are claims that sunscreen blocks the body's ability to produce vitamin D, which might also protect against cancer or have other benefits. And while that is true with thick applications of high SPF sunscreens, generally speaking, when these things are studied in moderate and normal applications and doses, these claims are overblown, if not unsubstantiated. And we're going to talk about the weird conspiracy theory that not wearing sunglasses somehow protects your body from ultraviolet damage. I just find that to be a weird corner of Twitter. We're also going to talk about the physiological benefits as well as the risks of sun exposure. We will cover cumulative DNA damage, photoaging, immunosuppression, and the clear causal role of ultraviolet in most skin cancers, alongside individual variability in skin type, latitude, genetics, and behavior. We're going to look at a ton of science. We will discuss evidence triangulation. For those of you who've tuned in for a long time, this is a drum that I beat a lot. Evidence triangulation is looking at where the convergence is across different types of scientific research. So just looking at observational data is, well, it's fraudulent to extrapolate from one data set. And you really need to look at the best available balance of evidence across all different types of research, because they all have their strengths and they all have their weaknesses. We're going to talk about how isolated mechanisms do not capture the wide array of photoproducts, and we're going to talk about study limitations like small effect sizes in practice. We're going to address your sunscreen concerns head on. So we're going to talk about systemic absorption of certain chemical filters. Totally a real thing. Absolutely something to be concerned about. Exceeding FDA thresholds. Absolutely. Got to be concerned about that. And endocrine effects. Yes, we will address all of those things. Again, I'm not here to just blindly advocate one approach to your mitigation of photo damage. We will examine why not all sunscreens and ingredients are created equal in efficacy and safety. We will also address the trade-offs of wearing sunscreen, the approval process of ingredients, the strengths and weaknesses of mineral options like zinc oxide and titanium oxide for those who prefer to go the natural route, which I absolutely advocate. And how a sense of false security leads to prolonged sun exposure and the consequences of long-term mutational load. We will sort of wrap up today's conversation talking about internal sunscreens, as some people call them, such as vitamins C and E and polyphenols from certain fruits and certain plants. we're going to talk about physical barriers that you can use to protect yourself, like hats and breathable clothing, umbrellas, UV tinted windows, or shade from a building, shade from a tree. And lastly, we will review practical tools like UV index apps that you can have on your phone, proper sun timing and best practices, and how you can repair your photo damaged skin and look youthful once again. If you appreciate these lectures, hell yeah, smash that like button, please, pretty please. Share this show with someone you know, someone you think needs to hear this. And let's just begin with the sort of retarded misinformation that prompted this entire thing, because I really didn't even want to do a show on this. Admittedly, it's good timing right now because of the time of year. It's in the mid 90s here in sunny South Carolina. And so I think the timing is appropriate. It's not like we're doing this show in mid-winter. But look, this post got me riled up. I'm a pretty nice guy on X. I don't really call people out too often. But when it comes to misinformation that I see, spreading like wildfire, that comes with serious risks when people follow this information and they listen to this advice, it's putting them in harm's way. And so I feel the need to step up. Let me first read this and then I'm going to go on a rant. Okay? Does that sound good? So Nicholas Holscher, I don't even follow this guy. You can see over here. He's just constantly in my feed because he's one of the main people who is reposted on X in the conservative world and in the truth movement. People love his clickbait and they share it. So he says the single largest sunscreen skin cancer study ever conducted found sunscreen users faced dramatically higher risks of every major skin cancer. Invasive melanoma up 292%. Melanoma in situ up 258%. Basal cell carcinoma up 140%. And squamous cell carcinoma up 126%. There he is on OAN, One America News, speaking with former Rep. Matt Gaetz. And if you want, you can watch the clip. It's pretty cringy, particularly after we rebut it today. I responded to him by saying, Nicholas, just like with your reporting of alpha-gal syndrome, you have proven you are unqualified to report the facts of epidemiological studies and instead sensationalize for clicks. How can you call yourself an epidemiologist when you strip away nuance, study design limitations, effect sizes, confounding factors, and the broader evidence base on UV radiation and skin cancer? You don't even bother to steel man opposing evidence. Very odd. You should know that one observational study must also be weighed against preclinical, interventional, and Mendelian randomization. This is pretty shameful reporting. I don't know. Was I too harsh? I didn't name call, but I was I think I had pretty choice words for him. Okay, you guys ready? Buckle up, because here comes a rant. I'm sorry, but it needs to be said. During COVID, Peter McCullough was arguably one of the top doctors in the country. He's an American cardiologist. He's a professor, and he grabbed the nation's attention by combating the government regarding the tyrannical and scientifically unsubstantiated protocols to lock down the country and to push vaccines. And the effects that the vaccines had were well documented by Peter McCullough. I've got his book. I've got no problems with him. He is one of the top guys in the country right now. He has a humongous platform, and he has the McCullough Fund, or the McCullough Foundation. And working for him is this Nicholas Holscher guy, who, if you click on his X, he is an epidemiologist and he has a master's in public health. We call out the corruption on both sides. I strive to do so, and I don't know if I would call this corruption per se, but my point is that I believe one of the flaws that affects both the left and the right is that we hire, perhaps first and foremost, for ideological conformity, ideological allegiance to our side. And that results from people saying, I don't want this person to be a lightning rod for negativity for my company and our brand. We want this person to represent what we're doing and signal to our tribe like this person is on our side and clearly, aligns with our values. And I think that the pursuit of trying to avoid conflict internally in a company, totally understandable. You don't want to hire somebody who's ideologically opposed to everything you're doing simply because they're smart and they have a great track record with their profession, at least. You don't want that to affect the body politic of your company. You don't want them and their attitude and their values that misalign with your own to harm the brand or to harm the politics of the company. And so what I see happening is people are hired because they sort of wave the same flag. And I tend to think that that's what's happening here with Nicholas Holscher, because the guy has a bad track record as far as I'm concerned. I did a show earlier addressing his misinformation, like egregious misinformation, frankly, regarding alpha-gal syndrome. And what he put out was promulgated by so many other people. It was shared far and wide. And so it reached a large amount of people, and he wasn't checking the basic facts. Go back and watch that show. He puts forward a constellation of arguments, and we knock them down one after the other. So he's not checking the information that he's putting out. And the same applies here with the sunscreen issue. He regurgitates things maybe that he's read or heard because it conforms with his ideas that everything is corrupt and that you can't trust scientists. Scientists are, proxies for the New World Order or something like that. He doesn't understand, or he really should, frankly, understand that epidemiology is one research branch and that there are other complementary research branches which all come with strengths and weaknesses. And this is known as evidence triangulation. This is, again, day one, chapter one of public health research. You should know that you can't stack all your chips or put all your eggs in one basket. It's like, as an epidemiologist, he should understand that there are limitations to epidemiology. I've done shows in the past where I praise epidemiology. And believe me, I'm not walking those statements back. I'm a huge fan of epidemiology. It's only the carnivore crowd that rejects epidemiology. Everyone else seems to appreciate what it brings to the table, as do I. However, epidemiology is observational. It is not interventional. There's no experimentation. There's no control that you're measuring against. And therefore, it's much, much harder to prove causation. That's why randomized, double-blind, placebo-controlled trials are the gold standard of interventional research and often have the best or highest likelihood of determining causation, particularly because you can observe before and after effects and compare them to a control group. And there are certain things that take much, much longer to develop etiologically in the body, such as diabetes or cardiovascular disease, even some cancers take decades. And so, yes, epidemiology can come in and buttress the clinical or interventional research, but there are also things that you can look to preclinical or laboratory research to tease out. That's where you're going to find much of your mechanistic data. You're going to look at, cellular and molecular biology in test tubes, petri dishes, animal models, and other bioassays. And so Nicholas Holscher, as an epidemiologist, self-professed, should understand the limitations of what he's looking at in the data. And the fact that he's not presenting that, as I say in my response to him, he doesn't even steelman opposing evidence, and he doesn't address the nuance like study limitations, effect sizes, and confounding factors, shows you that he is either, look, it's one of two things. He's either ignorant on the most basic aspects of epidemiology, which is his own profession, or he has this rabid confirmation bias where he regurgitates things that conform to his worldview, that confirm his worldview, and that signal to his audience that he's on their side so as to gain a larger following, so as to disseminate clickbait. Do you really think that Adam Riva, myself, as the head of Dauntless Dialogue, do you think that I would be doing these presentations, taking a plant-based diet approach, or coming into the conversation with sunscreen versus sun exposure and diving into the nuance? Do you think I would really be addressing these things if I cared about a following? Honest question for you. I've lost 500 or more subscribers on Rumble alone since I started doing these health talks because people oppose what I'm saying, and they think that what I'm saying is the party line or something, even though I go through great detail and go to great lengths to show that actually what I am saying and what I am advocating for is most of the time not aligned with the powers that be. The big multinational corporations, the foodstuff corporations, the biotech companies, the agritech companies, the government itself. There are so many times where I'm coming out in opposition to the mainstream narrative or to the mainstream culture. Advocating for a plant-based diet immediately puts me into about a 2% minority. And so I'm not going to get off on a side rant about nutrition here. My point is that when it comes to these conversations, you need to be able to talk about the nuance. And if you're not willing to go there and risk potential popularity points, then honestly, you shouldn't wade into these debates. And frankly, I'm at a point where I just don't care. I never really have. I would love to grow Dauntless to be a massive brand, and perhaps I'm my own worst enemy. But I also really deeply care about people's health. I care about the science. I've spent decades trying my best to understand both sides. I look at the opposition and do my best to steelman them. I try to find the people who make the best arguments from the opposition, and I try to find the people who make the best arguments from the proposition. And then what I do is I fact check rigorously on both sides. And usually you find that one side is putting their fingers in their ears or has confirmation bias and is following data ideologically rather than agnostically. So if you're in the Dauntless crowd and you appreciate this sort of like bluntness when it comes to these topics, and you don't really care about the politics of it all, and you don't really care about if one side has like a pseudo monopoly on the truth, then you're in the right place. Again, smash that like button. Thank you guys for hanging out with me. Now I told you I was going to rant. I prepared you for it. I warned you for it. You can't hold me accountable. And so now we're going to go into some of the rebuttals here, as opposed to just talking broadly. Now we're going to start by looking at the study that Nicholas Holscher cited, and it's from cancer epidemiological markers, gene environment analyses in a UK biobank skin cancer cohort identifies important SNPs in DNA repair genes that may help prognosticate disease risk by Jeremiah et al. And this is from November 2023. It's funny that, everyone on X is acting like it's a brand new study. It's not. And this study relied on self-reported behavior, and that's fine. It's just important context. Now, what we're going to talk about is the J-curve that I mentioned in the intro. And the J-curve is something you're going to learn about day one of epidemiology. There are books you can purchase. There are books you can find on Audible even that are introductions to epidemiology. They're incredible, and they'll give you the sort of broad brush, overview that you need to sort of understand obvious oversights and obvious confounding and obvious, limitations when they're presented to you. And so when scientists look at certain things, sometimes there is like something so anomalous, so bizarre that it stumps them at first, and they're just like, wait, what? So those who use sunscreens in an effort to prevent skin cancer are suddenly having much higher incidence of skin cancer. How can that be? And there are analogs in nutrition and other areas of public health that we can look to where the similar things have happened in the past. So with respect to alcohol, ethanol alcohol is a group 1 carcinogen. You guys have heard me talk about that. That means there is conclusive evidence that yes, it is absolutely carcinogenic. But what you find when you look at the data is that the disparity, the relative disparity between drinkers and non-drinkers is actually not that good. And so people go, oh, well, alcohol isn't actually that bad. It's not a cancer risk, etc. And it's only, decades pass, and then they go and they correct for certain things, and they find artifacts in the data, very obvious ones, that correct the J-curve. And you go, oh, okay, so actually people who, non-drinkers as a broad category, first included people who previously abused alcohol and quit. They developed some sort of chronic disease, they had waning health, and they needed to kick the habit, kick the addiction, clean themselves up, and have stayed sober. And so now they check the box that they're a non-drinker. And so that sort of smushes the graph, and you find, an anomalous J-curve. All right. But once you account for that, once you go back and you run the numbers again and you normalize for people who previously drank alcohol, particularly like based on quantity, like how many years, how many drinks, it almost invariably, it starts to return back to some sort of linear dose response, chart. And the same thing can be said for smoking. So when it comes to smoking, some people develop lung disease, or they, they get on like some sort of chemotherapy, whatever. They get to such a point where they have to quit smoking, and then they check the box and they're like, I'm a non-smoker. And that starts to now skew the data. And so these are established things that you need to look for. They're called confounding variables. We see the same thing with coffee drinkers. Well, who is actually, maybe more likely to drink coffee? And you find that certain people drink coffee because they're anxious or because they have sleep problems. And the same can be said about exercise. Like, some people don't exercise because they develop a disability. And so you need to be on the lookout for these confounders. And even some social activity or marriage findings suffer from reverse causation, like declining health reduces social engagement. This can be compounded by healthy user or selection bias. So these are things, again, you need to be teasing out in the data. So when it comes to alcohol, moderate drinkers tend on average to have higher socioeconomic status, better diets, more physical activity, better healthcare access, and more social engagement. You look at the data and you're like, wow, alcohol's not that bad, huh? It's like, no, actually, all of these other variables are confounding. Each of those factors can lower mortality risk. And so you need to sort of separate out, tease out the heterogeneous mix of your cohort. The same thing can be said about the French paradox, where in France in the 80s and 90s, they identified rates that were much lower than expected of heart disease and rates that were pretty high of dietary saturated fat intake. And once they tease this stuff out, it all goes away. And so that is the job of any epidemiologist worth their weight in salt. And that's why we're having this debate in the first place, pretty much, is because these things find their way into the sunscreen debate. So when it comes to the J curve, what you find is that there's a few things. The first thing is that it's sort of like a permission slip. People feel like they have license to spend more time in the sun, more time sunbathing, if they've put on SPF 15 at 10 a.m. Like one application, they're like, okay, I'm good. And so people who use sunscreen spend far more time in the sun. And these are all things that the big study out of, I think it was the Burbank study, the Biobank skin study in the UK, it didn't account for any of these things. So, the debate is that rising melanoma rates prove sunscreens failed. Incidence has risen substantially. Like in the United States, incidence of melanoma has tripled since the 1970s, but mortality has stabilized or declined. And so you get these two camps. The one camp says, well, the sun is natural, so I'm going to lean towards that, whereas sunscreen is unnatural, so I must be opposed to that. Well, let's actually dive into the science. Let's dive in and see if those positions hold up. Both positions are based around kernels of truth. They contain partial truths, but they're sort of tribal oversimplifications. And so the goal of this presentation is simply to triangulate evidence and bring a balanced approach to the conversation, to real world behavior, to pharmacokinetics, to evidence triangulation. That's what we're about here. Not isolated mechanisms or single studies. And so so when it comes to the sunscreen paradox, rising skin cancer rates do not equal sunscreen failure or causation of skin cancer. We know that ultraviolet radiation is a group 1 carcinogen. We have both preclinical and clinical evidence demonstrating as such, randomized control trials. We have higher skin cancer rates amongst sunscreen wearers being the result of confounding, and observational data shows 2 variables without a controlled experiment. So that's what we were talking about before. Observational data, you just look at the outcomes, and don't get me wrong, there's things you can learn from that, but you need to weigh it against the other research modalities. The study should look at who wears sunscreen the most, who is most prone to get a sunburn. People who have pale skin, obviously, and we're going to look at some research on that. People who burn easily, people who have a family history of skin cancer, people who plan to spend 8 hours on a beach versus someone who's just, walking to the post office. These are all things that can be confounders. And so incidence, I think we mentioned this, incidence has increased over decades, but this correlates with better detection and screening. So there's more biopsies done now than ever before. You have aging populations, and you have historical increases in intentional tanning. And you play that out 20 to 30 years later, and those people who were tanning when tanning beds were all the rage 30 years ago or whatever, we're seeing the downstream results of that. And so getting a bigger, taking a broader look at the science, looking at randomized control trials, what can we infer from them as opposed to just observational? So when we run an experiment in a clinical setting, well, we actually find the exact opposite. Interesting, right? And so the primary trial, which ran for about 4.5 years, was by Green et al. And I have that pulled up. We're going to look at it. So let me enlarge this. Daily sunscreen application and beta-carotene supplementation in prevention of basal cell and squamous cell carcinomas of the skin, a randomized control trial. And all right, so this was published in The Lancet in 1999. And after just about 4.5 years, daily sunscreen use did not significantly reduce the number of people newly affected by basal cell carcinoma or squamous cell carcinoma compared with discretionary use. However, when counting tumors rather than counting people, daily sunscreen significantly reduced squamous cell carcinoma incidence by about 39%. A hazard rate ratio of about 0.61, confidence interval of 0.46 to 0.81. No significant reduction was seen in basal cell carcinoma tumors. The trial found no evidence of harm from daily sunscreen use and concluded that routine application can help prevent cutaneous squamous cell carcinoma in adults. And then we have another one, which was published. Is this the follow-up one? Yeah, this is the follow-up. So this was the follow-up that Green et al. Did, and this was published in the Journal of Clinical Oncology in 2011. So this was basically over 10 years after the intervention ended, and they found, by the way, this is like the most cited paper when it comes to randomized control trials on the subject. It reported fewer new primary melanomas, especially invasive melanomas, in the daily sunscreen group. And over roughly 10 to 15 years of follow-up, basically the daily sunscreen group developed 11 new primary melanomas compared with 22, so double, in the discretionary use group, corresponding to a hazard ratio of 0.5, and that was with a 95% confidence interval. The reduction was more pronounced for invasive melanomas, 3 cases in the daily group versus 11 in the discretionary group, a hazard ratio of 0.27 with a 95% confidence interval. The authors concluded that regular daily sunscreen use in adults may help prevent melanoma, building on earlier findings that it reduces squamous cell carcinoma. We also have this study in Cancer Epidemiology, Biomarkers, and Prevention. Prolonged prevention of squamous cell carcinoma of the skin by regular sunscreen use by Vanderpoels et al. And this was published in 2006. Regular daily sunscreen use during the original 4.5 during the original 4.5 trial continued to show lasting benefits. Squamous cell carcinoma tumor incidence remains significantly lower. No clear long-term protective effect was observed for basal cell carcinoma. So yeah, this is all in stark contrast to the epidemiological data where you're just looking at population level outcomes. You're actually taking people into a clinical setting. You are controlling for variables. You're doing placebo groups. You're doing, control groups. In this case, a discretionary use one. And so you find the opposite. So epidemiologically, when you control for, time spent in the sun and skin type and ethnicity and all those different factors, and then interventionally, when you run the same control trials before and after for 10 plus years, you find absolutely sunscreen can prevent or reduce incidence of these different melanomas. And so when it comes to sunscreen efficacy, I think it's established that yes, it works. Now, the broader question, which we'll get to in a minute, is, does it come with its own drawbacks? Like, for instance, if I were to just throw a crazy analogy out there that I'm going to make up on the fly, like imagine, when Fukushima went offline and melted down, right? Got hit with the tidal wave and everything. And they're like, okay, we need to send people in to the radioactive zone. They're like, here, we have these hazmat suits for you to wear. And people put them on, and someone else goes, wait, not so fast. Hold on. Did we make these hazmat suits out of the best possible materials? Or can those suits, are they made from, do they have asbestos in them? And you're like, that's a great question. I hope that I'm wearing something that is neutral at best, that doesn't come with its own risks as I go try to deal with the melted down uranium core of the Fukushima reactor. And so the same sort of thought process applies to sunscreen. Okay, if you can accept the fact, and by the way, we're going to go much deeper on this, if you can accept the fact that there are risks associated with ultraviolet radiation, does sunscreen, is it neutral? Is it totally safe? Or are there trade-offs? And so that's what we're going to get into in a moment. But at the very least, when we're talking about the efficacy of sunscreen, can it at least do what it's sold to do? Not getting into safety, but is it efficacious? And you find that yes, not only does it reduce erythema, which is like the sunburn, the reddening of the skin. It can also reduce DNA damage markers. We're going to talk about that in a moment. It can reduce immunosuppression and photoaging endpoints. The strongest clinical data definitely shows that there's a reduction in actinic keratinases and squamous cell carcinoma with regular sunscreen use. Now, when it comes to melanoma prevention data, they are biologically plausible and directionally consistent, but less definitive in randomized control trials. Behavioral confounding will always be a variable. It will always be a variable. And so real world performance is often understated because they're self-reported in a lot of the observational trials, and what people think they're putting on is often much more than they are putting on. In other words, they're putting less on than they think. People don't do even application most of the time. They don't hit all of the areas that need it most of the time. They put on very thin layer of sunscreen most of the time, or they use an SPF that isn't fully, it's not that high and it's not that helpful for the intensity and duration of the sun exposure. And so real world performance is limited by under application. And so that's important. Like when we talk about the data, it's like the sunscreen data, if anything, it's it's conservative in its findings when it comes to the best health outcomes insofar as prevention of skin cancers. But that's where we turn to the randomized control trials for the best data on that subject. And then when we're talking about, are there physiological benefits to sunshine? Absolutely. There's a lot of nuance there. And so UVB-driven cutaneous vitamin D synthesis, which is a mouthful. It just basically means when the sunshine hits your skin and goes into your skin, you produce vitamin D. And vitamin D is so beneficial for so many different physiological processes in the body, and getting it from sunshine is the most natural route. In fact, when it comes to meeting your needs, about 90% on average comes from sunshine. And about 10% comes from diet most of the time in most people. And so if you are insufficient, or God forbid, if you're deficient, turning to the sun is actually a much quicker and much more efficacious way to get your vitamin D levels up. But there are timing issues. In the morning and in the evening, that sun is low in the sky, right? So it has to pass through much more ozone, many, many, many more miles of ozone. And ozone is sort of like the melanin in your skin. Ozone is a natural UV filter. So if you go out in the first 45 minutes and the last 45 minutes of the day, that's the safest time to sunbathe and get your sunshine. And that is awesome for your circadian rhythms, and your melatonin production at night often is connected back to how you start your day. Like your entire 24-hour cycle is important for circadian maintenance, not just the last hour of the day. For some reason, people think that they can just neglect the rest of the day. It doesn't matter, and they can, fall asleep as long as they wear their red light sunglasses at night. It's like the whole day counts. Circadian entrainment via melanopsin containing retinal ganglion cells, modulated by morning outdoor light, and local and systemic neuroendocrine effects like POMC peptides and beta endorphin, potential mood and immune modulation. How cool is that? Low dose repeated exposure can induce photoadaptation. So what that basically means in layman's terms is like you can get low dose sun exposure and slowly over time increase your melanin. It's like you don't have to burn to become darker, and you can actually build up a bit of a tolerance. That doesn't mean that you have permission slip to go spend 12 hours in the sun. It just means that there are there's moderate adaptation in the margins. And so all of those things that I just mentioned are totally dependent on your skin type and your latitude, how far from the equator you are, and your behavior. They're important factors, right? Everything we're talking about has nuance, and there's like infinite layers. And so I'm always tempted to kind of go deeper and deeper, but I have to draw the line at a certain point. I'm trying to give you an overview with this presentation, but we will continue to dig into each of these as the presentation goes on. Now, when it comes to damage from the sun, trust me, there are very objective methods and tools that scientists can use to determine the relative skin age and damage, particularly from photo damage. And if some people out there, the crunchy hippie crowds, just want to pretend like this isn't a thing and doesn't exist, and they don't think there's any drawbacks at all to prolonged sun exposure, maybe there's no convincing them. But there's a device called Visia, multispectral clinical imaging system. also referred to as multispectral imaging. And I'm going to show you guys a picture of this tool. It's pretty interesting. You might even be familiar with it. I don't know. But basically, you look at somebody and they look youthful. Maybe they're in their 20s or 30s. They have at least a physically pleasant appearance to their skin. And you can do this Visia skin analysis and you find all of the hidden damage, often subcutaneous. And so this device scans your face. Yeah, because you can do it to any part of your body, but often they're geared towards your face. I mean, your face is what people see. It's like your brand, it's your personality, it's your image, it's like how you socially interact with people. So people care about their faces, right? And you find all of this photo damage that accrues over time. And by the time you're in your 50s, your collagen synthesis starts to decline and your elasticity starts to decline and your burden of photoproducts starts to increase, and you just don't look as youthful, right? You've got your crow's feet, your wrinkles, and your sunspots, and yeah, I mean, people still deny that's a thing, oddly. And so we have machines that can diagnose and analyze. And the Visia multispectral clinical imaging system is considered the gold standard in assessing skin age and damage. It shows you the hidden sun damage, the hidden UV damage. It's high resolution, under controlled lighting, and analyzes multiple biomarkers against a large database, often described as the world's largest of its kind. And it looks for key markers like UV spots. We talked about that. Brown spots, deep pigmentation, surface spots, pores, wrinkles, texture, red areas, inflammation, vascularity, and porphyrins. It generates comparative percentiles and gives you an estimated skin age. And so, I don't know if you guys have ever seen that image, but there's this, let me pull it up real quick. There's a famous image where there was a truck driver who, for like decades, had the sun shining on one side of his face, and that side of his face aged rapidly. Here it is. You can see this side of his face looks so much better than the right side of his face. Oh, you can't see my cursor on the screen, I guess. Well, the right side of his face obviously is so damaged. It's droopy, it's wrinkly, it's leathery, and the left side of his face doesn't look too bad, particularly like on his cheek, his forehead even. He's got some sunspots, but this just goes to show you that decades of photoproducts accumulate, and that becomes a body burden that you just start to lose the fight, and aging takes over. Now, we've talked about the obvious or not so obvious benefits of sun exposure, and now we're going to talk about the documented risks and mechanisms. And so the best study to look at here is this one. So published in Frontiers in Oncology in the skin cancer section by Liu et al. Is a Mendelian randomization study of genetic liability to cutaneous melanoma and sunburns. That just means skin cancer and sunburns. Published in August 2024. And let me give you guys a quick word on Mendelian randomization in case you've missed prior shows. Mendelian randomization is somewhat of a gray zone between epidemiology and randomized control trials. It is a natural experiment because it wasn't set up by researchers and humans, it was set up by nature. You are genetically assigned alleles at birth randomly. And so we can then use that retroactively to look all the way back to childhood and tease out genetic factors when it comes to different lifestyle and diet and other factors that manifest in chronic disease and mortality. And so Mendelian randomization is so powerful. Now it's not the only thing you should look at, just as we were talking about with Nicholas Holscher. You shouldn't only look at epidemiology. Well, you shouldn't only look at Mendelian randomization, but it can drop the hammer on certain things. Like we've shown that incredible chart with atherosclerosis and dietary cholesterol, LDL cholesterol. And there is a clear causal relationship because you have something like a 5-year, 5-year randomized control trial, linear progression, dose response to LDL cholesterol. You have something like 25-year epidemiological benchmark. And then when it comes to Mendelian randomization, they all trend in the same direction. But with Mendelian randomization, you have like a 55-year median follow-up. And so when all three of those types of research all have clear linear progressions and they substantiate and corroborate one another and they're all in the same direction, it's case closed. So Mendelian randomization has really put the final nail in the coffin with LDL and atherosclerosis. And so when it comes to this, well, we don't have Mendelian randomization studies looking at sunscreen versus non-sunscreen use, but we do have Mendelian randomization that looks at people's susceptibility to melanoma and sunburns based on their genetic liability, if you will. And so genetic liability to sunburns was causally associated with increased risk of cutaneous melanoma, 95% confidence interval. Results were consistent across multiple Mendelian randomization methods, supporting robustness of the association. The authors concluded that genetic susceptibility to sunburns contributes to melanoma risk and recommended preventative measures such as just limiting UV overexposure and using sun protection, including but not limited to sunscreen. And then we have things like DNA damage and mutational load. So ultraviolet radiation, particularly UVB, generates cyclobutane pyrimidine dimers, also known as CPDs. These are one of the primary photoproducts, and from this point forward, we'll pretty much just refer to them as CPDs because it's a mouthful. And 6,4 photoproducts, that's what they're known as, 6,4. UVA contributes oxidative lesions and can produce CPDs. These accumulate with age in sun-exposed normal skin and preferentially hit cancer driver genes. Mutational burden rises exponentially with age and is strongly modified by skin phototype. And so obviously if you have higher melanin, if you are of the African descent, you can spend more time in the sun, but that also means that you need to also spend more time in the sun to get your vitamin D production. And we talked about the IARC, the International Agency for Research on Cancer, classification as a group 1 carcinogen. Solar radiation is a group 1 carcinogen to humans. So UVA, UVB, and UVC is carcinogenic. Make no mistake. The 2025 IARC analysis says that about 83% of global skin melanoma cases in 2022 were attributable to UV radiation. 83%. And greater than 95% in high incidence fair-skinned regions like Australia, New Zealand, Northern Europe, and North America. So it's not looking good for a lot of sun exposure. If you're one of those people that sunbathes all day long, I hope you're thinking twice. Non-melanoma skin cancers are also strongly linked to cumulative exposure, but this has to do with the sites of chronic exposure and your latitude. Photoaging, so UVA penetrates deeper and drives collagen degradation, mitochondrial DNA common deletion, and extracellular matrix remodeling. Yikes. And then as far as immunosuppression, which we mentioned earlier, ultraviolet induces local and systemic immune suppression. This facilitates tumor growth and is clinically relevant, like in very high skin cancer rates in chronically immunosuppressed transplant patients on sun-exposed skin. And so just a quick sidebar on vitamin D. We covered some of these points earlier, but it's a fat-soluble hormone that can be produced in the skin or obtained dietarily. Generally speaking, about 90% comes from the sun, about 10% comes from your diet on average. As of 2011, 41.6% of Americans were found to be insufficient in vitamin D. So nearly half of Americans are not getting enough. According to the National Institutes of Health, as little as 5 to 30 minutes of midday sun exposure per week is enough to prevent symptoms of deficiency. And so 5 to 30 minutes a week. Don't tell me you don't have time to go outside. That's like a quick walk around the block. The darker skin tone you have, or the higher BMI you have, the more time you need to spend in the sun to produce vitamin D. Now, one of the common misconceptions and myths put out on X and elsewhere is that moderate, normal amounts of vitamin D, of sunscreen application will prevent your body from producing any vitamin D. And there's some truth, but mostly that's overblown. So the kernel of truth is that in clinical trials, they have shown high SPF, thick applications, reapplying as needed, can drop vitamin D synthesis. Now, in real world usage, you don't have to worry about that. Randomized and interventional studies using SPF 15 to 16 sunscreens in everyday settings generally found little or no clinically meaningful reduction in 25 OHD levels, which is your vitamin D levels in your serum. People rarely apply sunscreen perfectly, leaving many areas uncovered and get incidental exposure. Vitamin D synthesis is likely to continue unless you're a very, very thick applier of high SPF. Recent high-quality interventional data on high SPF, about SPF 50 or beyond, used for about a year versus just discretionary use, found a modest but statistically significant reduction in serum levels of vitamin D and higher rates of vitamin D deficiency at the end of the study in the daily high SPF group. 46% versus about 37%. So you're talking about a 9% difference between the groups. So if you're extremely diligent, if you're applying high SPF on the daily for years on end, yeah, that can result in in a dip. Now, there's this weird, just unfounded conspiracy, I'm sorry to say, that sunglasses, if you're wearing them, you're somehow shutting down your body's ability to block or protect itself from UV. And if you don't wear them, getting like the sunshine in your eyes will somehow ramp up your body's defenses. And there's just zero science on this. If somebody wants to run a study where you do a randomized control trial to show that, that would be awesome. But all of the evidence that we have right now shows that it's all locally dependent. In other words, the melanin production is going to, I mean, if you've ever gotten a tan in your life, you know that you have like tan lines. So the melanin production is stimulated locally to the irradiated skin. Eye protection is like an independent system from your melanin production. So if you want to believe in that, go ahead. If you have some evidence on that, send it to me. Email it to me, please. Make sure it's good quality, but the evidence does not support that right now. Sunscreen concerns and absorption data. So regarding, okay, so like at this point in the conversation, we've talked thoroughly about the risks and benefits of sun exposure, the good and the bad. We've also really dug into, the efficacy of sunscreens. Yes, they at least do what they're told. When people wear them properly, you can reduce your skin cancer rates. So what about like safety for certain ingredients and certain sunscreens? And so we actually have some evidence here, which is pretty bad, not looking good for sunscreens, conventional sunscreens. And so this is the largest randomized controlled trial that I could find, effect of sunscreen applications under maximal use conditions on plasma concentrations of sunscreen active ingredients, published in JAMA in 2019. And it says, in this randomized clinical trial that included 24 healthy patients and application of 4 commercially available sunscreen formulations, maximum plasma concentrations for the active ingredient avobenzone were 4.0, 3.4, 4.3, and 1.8 nanograms per milliliter for 2 different sprays, a lotion and a cream, respectively. The systemic absorption of sunscreen active ingredients supports the need for further studies to determine the clinical significance of these findings. And so, yeah, basically they found that the threshold, that the oxybenzone reached particularly high levels in people's serum. When you're using them at their maximum levels, you do exceed the FDA recommendations, right? And that's where you get a lot of these endocrine concerns. And so oxybenzone, which is the most studied, and others were shown to be much higher than FDA recommends. Now there's a newer filter on the market which just was approved in the United States like within the last month or two, and it's been decades behind other countries. If you've ever talked to somebody who's like really passionate about sunscreens, they always talk about how you got to go to South Korea or some other Asian country where they sell these things. They're much cleaner, they are much more efficacious, and et cetera, et cetera. And that revolves around bemotrizonal, I think is how you say it, which was just approved by the FDA and others as generally recognized as safe in America, which means that they show negligible systemic absorption at maximal use, and that they're safe. And generally recognized as safe that's the distinction that the zinc oxide and titanium oxide, the natural mineral filters, have always, lauded and had in their favor. They were the only two that were generally recognized as safe. Well, now there's a third one, and so you just have to be, I guess, agnostic and go with the evidence. Of course, I'm all about try to go the natural route as much as possible. But if you're somebody who is going to spend so much time in the sun that the natural mineral filters, the zinc and titanium, are not necessarily suitable, then maybe consider going to the bemotrizinol. Sorry, I struggle with that one. Before you go to the other ones that are just they're not necessarily as safe. So yes, I'm advocating for, when in doubt, first and foremost, you want to wear long sleeves if possible, or get a big sombrero. Try to get in the shade as much as possible, or use a beach umbrella or UV tinted windows as much as possible. But if you are in the sun, the natural sunscreens, the natural filters, the titanium and zinc oxide are generally the way to go, but also the one, bemotrizinol, the one that was just approved. That's, I think, probably your next best bet for long-term sun exposure. Most people think that the zinc and the titanium oxide ones reflect UV or sunlight, and they don't. They actually just absorb it. And the limitation, though, is that they're lower SPF. You're going to get, up to 30, I think. And they're super thick. And, it is what it is. You got to take the good with the bad. But compared to your other chemical ones, which can go way higher on SPF and are usually much thinner to apply, we unfortunately are creatures of convenience, right? We want the things that are the easiest and have the best bang for the buck. But when you're concerned about health outcomes, definitely go the natural route. All right. The bemotrizinol has this track record of 20 to 25 years in other countries. We talked about Asia, but even in Europe. And it's the first new active ingredient approved in America in 25 years or something like that. And so, America is often behind. One of the things that we get criticized for, rightly so, is our acceptance of GMOs, whereas other countries are much more stringent with that sort of thing. Certain pesticides are banned in other countries, and we're oh, hell yeah, the more the merrier here. And so it's the same thing in the sunscreen department, and you can draw your own conclusions as to why that is, why the FDA has been so reluctant on these things. There's a really interesting mini documentary on YouTube by a guy named Christoph, with an E at the end, Christoph. He works with Johnny Harris for New Press, and he did a mini doc on sunscreen 6 months ago, I think, and it was pretty good, and I learned a lot from it when I watched it, and you probably will too. All right, so we've talked now. We're in the home stretch. So if you're just joining us, you missed so much. But we're gonna sort of round things out here now at the end with some summaries, and then a practical framework for how you can think about these things and adjust your behaviors, if you will, and some tools, and then we're going to wrap up. So we talked at length about evidence triangulation. which is to say, not turning to one study type. Like, I was talking with a friend recently, and he said to me, you shouldn't just go believing all that Fauci science. And I like almost pulled my hair out, because go back and watch these lectures we do here. We do, 2+ hour lectures every week, going deep into the nuance, deep into the data. And as I've said before, the opinions that I hold, they're almost always in line with the independent scientists. And I have big problems with like the mainstream culture. And so, if you look at mainstream outcomes, standard outcomes, they're pretty abysmal. And beyond that, I'll just say that I spend so much time trying to understand how tomfoolery is pulled off in the scientific world. Like, I'm very curious as to how hoaxes and scams and pseudoscience is promulgated and how that sort of research is conducted. And I spend so much time trying to understand how Fauci et al. Pulled off COVID. And I just am fascinated by that. And I can talk at length about how they've actually done that. And just if you want to dip your toes in the water, there's an incredible documentary on Dauntless by my friend John Davidson called Epidemic of Fraud, where they go into how that was pulled off. And it was the rejection of epidemiology pretty much by and large. Like, that was one of the main things that they did. And there was also the fabrication of other data, but it rested upon, the rejection of epidemiology and the reliance on, rigged clinical trials. And you can go so much further into that topic if you want. I'm not going to do that here now. But when someone, like my friend said to me, like, don't go believing that Fauci science all the time, I'm like, dude, I literally understand how Fauci science works, and I am not coming from that position at all. I'm totally in opposition to it. I'm trying to expose the Fauci science. So don't pull that crap on me, because I can rant for hours about how that stuff is done and perpetrated. Like, I can rant for hours about these subjects because I've dug so deep into the nuance. And I'm not saying I'm 100% right all the time. I don't have a perfect track record. I don't think anyone does. But if you can't have someone steelman the opposition, don't give them credence. Like, they haven't done their research if they're just parroting the talking points. And so when it comes to looking at the various forms of scientific research, you want to wrap your hands around preclinical, clinical, epidemiological, Mendelian randomization. You can look at things like multi-omics or pharmacokinetics. You can integrate all of these different types of science and then draw conclusions once you have the best available balance of data. And that's what we're trying to do here, to tease out what is true and what isn't. And I think we're taking a very balanced approach. Honestly, all things considered, we're saying that the sun has benefits and risks. We're saying that sunscreen has benefits and risks. Oh my gosh, like, how controversial can that be? But people want to tribalize. They really want you to come down on one side or the other. They want you, in our world, in the truth movement, to come down on the side of what is natural. The sun is natural. Sunscreens are unnatural. And so they push you to weigh in from that perspective. And I'm not going to do that, because there's more nuance there. And, when we talk about, like, vitamin D synthesis, like, I'm willing to admit that, yeah, there's a dip there, but that's only at the higher levels. Yes, there are melanoma rates that are higher among sunscreen wearers, but that's because of the classic epidemiological J-curve artifact, because people self-license to spend more time in the sun when they think they've put on enough of an application, and rarely, it's almost never enough. And so we also have small effect sizes in so many of these trials, and imperfect or under applications. What's it called? Like, where you're not putting on as much you think you're putting on. So there are issues with all of this stuff, and we're talking about those issues. So I think we're being very balanced. Yeah. And we talked about the mechanistic understanding of UV damage with the CPDs, P53 mutations. We talked about time of day matters, first and last 45 minutes of sunlight. So now let's kind of round out with a practical framework. We're going to talk about some tools that you can rely on. So there are apps that you can download on your phone. These are UV index apps. There's one called UV Lens, like the lens of a camera, UV Lens. There's one called Sun Smart, and there's another one called Sun Cap. Those are all good. They all are totally fine. They're going to help you decide like when and where it's a good idea to, get sun exposure or to wear sunscreen. I think a daily mineral filter, like a low SPF, like 15 or SPF 20, titanium dioxide or zinc oxide is a good idea. Even if it's just once in the morning. Now you should, reapply as needed, but it's better than nothing. And I think just assuming like I live on Earth and I can go outside and I can throw caution to the wind and I don't have to worry about the sun ever, it's just not supported. And if you want standard outcomes, do what people have always done throughout history. Just don't worry about your food. Don't worry about the sun. Don't worry about exercise. Don't worry about anything. See how that works out for you. The longevity scientists have a consensus now of about 140 to 150 is the current maximum lifespan of a human. And yet the standard outcomes is about 70 to 80 years. And so we're only living to half of our potential age. And I honestly think, and we've done a whole show on this in the past on longevity and longevity escape velocity. Go back and watch that. But I think that number of 140 to 150 is just going to continue to climb. And so it's an incredible time to be alive. So you want to combine strategies. You don't just want to rely on sunscreen. That's just kind of silly. You want to wear hats if you're in intense sun. If you can get away with like long, flowy, white clothes, that's good too. Breathable clothing. Umbrellas at the beach. UV tinted windows on your car, or I guess you wouldn't do it on your house, but there is a time and a place for these tools, right? And if you're the type of person who's fair-skinned, you should take this very seriously. If you're the type of person who has a family history of skin cancers, you should probably take this seriously. If you're the type of person who works outdoors, take this seriously. Look for broad spectrum products. All day products are not necessarily better. Broad spectrum is what you want to look for. Scrutinize ingredients. Read the ingredients on the panel and make sure that you're comfortable with them. We've listed 3 that I think are pretty good, and the rest I would never put on my body unless I was in like a very serious situation. I was on a boat in the middle of the Atlantic and we were like drifting without gasoline, and I was like, oh shit, all we have is this conventional sunscreen. I'm baking here in the sun all day. Like, yeah, I would absolutely, do it in a severe situation. Especially because a lot of these chemicals, like chemical exposure, for endocrine effects and cancer progression, you really need like long-term exposure, generally speaking. Yeah. So now to wrap up, we're just going to close with some thoughts on if you do have sun damage, if you do have photo damage to your skin and you're like, hey man, I want to look younger. I want to look better. I want to heal my skin, not only for the vanity of it, but your skin plays a foundational role in your immune system. And so the older you get, the more dry your skin becomes. This is why lotion application is increasingly important as you age. That is actually a barrier. And they've actually shown that older people with drier skin are more prone to infection transdermally. And so it's beyond vanity. It's also has to do with your immune system. It's your first barrier to your environment. And so first of all, prevention is best, and we should emphasize that. Avoidance of the sun, not wholesale avoidance, but strategic avoidance is important. Protect yourself, protect your skin first and foremost. Go out in the sun in the last 45 minutes of the day. But then, you have some treatments now that are on the market that are basically natural. I mean, they're not like pharmaceutical in nature, but yeah, they're technologies. So I'm all for technologies that are natural. So you have broadband light and intense pulsed light therapy. These target pigment like melanin and cause sunspots and brown spots to reduce redness and blood vessels. They improve overall photo damage. They're associated with gene expression shifts towards a younger skin pattern. So you're not just like topically or superficially doing something, you're actually shifting your genetic expression, which is pretty cool. There's a lot of long-term observational data on perceived younger skin age, and these broadband light and pulsed light type therapies are often stacked with some of these other ones we're going to mention. There are certain lasers you can use. I'm not going to give you exact names because it's not like I want to like skew you towards any brand, but there are laser treatments that you can do. And generally you do these like every 6 months or as needed. And you give your skin sufficient time to heal. It can improve the tone, the texture, the dyschromia, the sun damage, the fine lines, the pigmentation. And there are some radio frequency methods that'll tighten the skin. Thermomechanical ablation, I honestly don't know much about that one, but it came up in my research. It creates controlled micro injuries for collagen and elastin improvement and firmness, sometimes paired with exosomes. Well, that's very expensive though. I know exosomes are quite pricey. And this can be paired with red light therapy, with hyperbaric oxygen therapy. Hyperbaric oxygen therapy might be the number one thing I would do if I had to do one thing, but it can be very expensive and it's very time consuming. You have to spend hours and hours and hours in a hyperbaric chamber over time, but it is a whole body rejuvenation. You can also just do things like microneedling and derma rolling, and these will tighten your skin and catalyze collagen synthesis and stem cell proliferation to go to the targeted areas and heal it and rejuvenate it. And so you don't need to fear the sun, but you should be aware of the obvious risks, and you should have an informed strategy for navigating life outdoors. You should not throw caution to the wind, in my opinion. You should take care of your skin. You should take care of your health, and you should realize that there are trade-offs for sunscreen and sun exposure, and you can minimize those trade-offs. You can minimize the risks by leaning more towards natural sunscreens or sun avoidance measures like blocking with everything we mentioned, umbrellas, UV tinted windows, and hats and things like that, breathable clothing. There's no reason to fear it. Just be prepared, be aware, and take the active measures. And if you really appreciate the nuanced conversations that we have here at Dauntless, if you appreciate my approach to these things, if you appreciate slowing down, looking at both sides, trying to tease out the actual science and not taking a tribalistic stance one way or the other, then give us a subscribe, give us a follow, give us a like, And thank you guys so much for tuning in. Looks like we don't really have any questions. I'm going to check each of the platforms here before I go. And I just want to say thank you guys so much for tuning in. We appreciate each and every one of you. We're working our tails off. I know that there's been a drop in our output frequency these past few months, but please hang in there. Just know that we are working on some real beauties behind the scenes, and we could use your support to grow and reach more people. For now, I'm Adam Riva. Stay healthy, and we'll see you guys next week. Peace.